Our next speaker, who is Hemanth who is a PhD student in the lab. He's about halfway through his PhD, so about 2 years you've been here, 1.5 years? 2.2 years. He's not counting, don't worry. And making very good progress. Going to talk to you about some very exciting work on supersonic jet noise. So you use the microphone and use the clicker, and hopefully it all works.
Hello everyone, I'm Hemanth. I'll be presenting my ongoing research on effect of wall curvature on supersonic jet noise.
Not working? Maybe just hit the...
So the presentation is divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I will give a brief introduction to supersonic jet noise, various components of supersonic jet noise. I will also present a brief review on classical feedback loop theory of Powell. And then I will lay out motivations and objectives of the current study. And in part 2, I will talk about governing equations, methodology, and various core features that were developed. In part 3, I will discuss results both in terms of flow field and acoustics. And finally, I will present conclusions. So first of all, what is a supersonic jet? It's a stream of fluid that's coming out of a nozzle at supersonic speed. So when it comes out at a supersonic speed, it has all these high-speed flow structures such as expansion fans, oblique shocks, Mach stems, and all these kind of features. So these structures interact with the surrounding the jet shear layer to produce acoustic radiation into the surrounding atmosphere. And this is quite undesirable. These kind of configurations can be found in many aerospace applications, particularly as you can see in these 2 images. There is a space shuttle on the left operating at an overexpanded state, and on the right we have an underexpanded jet from a military aircraft. So over the past 50 so years, people have studied this problem to understand the mechanism behind the generation of supersonic jet noise. And with the advent of computational aeroacoustics, high-performance computing, and numerical algorithms, even CFD has played an important role in uncovering this phenomenon. Supersonic jet noise can be divided into 3 parts, 3 main components: screech, broadband shock-associated noise, and mixing noise. These arrows here indicate the predominant directions in which these noise components propagate. So what you are seeing on the screen here are the pressure fluctuation contours from one of the simulation around a supersonic jet. So red indicates a high pressure fluctuation and blue indicates a negative pressure fluctuation. So we can have a microphone here and extract a time series pressure data. And if we do Fourier analysis for that, we will get what is called as pressure spectrum, and this is how it looks like. So I'll start from screech. Screech basically occurs at off-design conditions in shock-containing jets. It occurs because of a aeroacoustic resonance phenomena, and it can be characterized as a distinct tonal peak in the pressure spectrum. And broadband shock-associated noise, it occurs because of the interaction between the shock cells and the shear layer, and it propagates along the lateral direction away from the jet. And mixing noise occurs like this: as the jet comes out of the nozzle, it creates large and fine-scale turbulent structures. They interact with the surrounding atmosphere to form local quadrupole sources, and they can be perceived as low amplitude broadband noise in the spectrum. So let's briefly look into the classical feedback loop theory of Powell. It's a very simple theory, and it's very powerful and successful in predicting screech tones in various supersonic jet configurations. So the theory goes like this: we have a supersonic jet here. There are Kelvin-Helmholtz instability waves coming from this region. So as they move downstream, they interact with the shock cells. So there are 2 events here, basically. The first event is the instability waves. They travel from the nozzle exit to the downstream shock cells. And for that event to take place, it takes this much amount of time, which is the distance over the velocity. The velocity is the convection velocity of the instability waves. And the event number 2 is when these instability waves interact with the shock cells, they get amplified and produce acoustic radiation, which travel outside of the jet at a speed of sound in the atmosphere. So to get that time, we can calculate it using h by the acoustic speed in the surrounding atmosphere. If we add these 2 times and take an inverse of that, we'll get the cycle frequency, which is the screech frequency. Usually we multiply that with n to account for harmonics and stuff. So as a result of this, the jet can oscillate in different styles or in different modes. So the jet can oscillate along the axis, which is called toroidal A mode. The jet can also oscillate perpendicular or lateral to the jet axis, which is called flapping mode, and there is also other mode called helical mode. So what am I doing in this work particularly? So there are supersonic jets come in different configurations. I'm particularly looking at the impinging supersonic jet configurations. So they can be found in applications such as vertical takeoff landing and even in industrial applications such as cold spray painting. So it's not always that our impinging surface is flat. It can be rough, or it can have a concavity or convexity kind of surface. As you can see in this Mars landing sequence, the terrain is rough. So I want to answer these questions particularly. What happens to the sound pressure levels with the introduction of concavity or convexity? What happens to the screech frequency? What happens to the jet oscillation behavior? These kind of important questions. So for this, I will be presenting 3 cases in this presentation, with one with convex impinging wall, one with flat impinging wall, and the third one is with the concave impinging wall. So with the introduction of this curvature, there will be some time delay into the feedback loop equation, and I'm trying to update the scaling of that with respect to the geometry. So let's jump into part 2. I will start with the governing equations and solving 3-dimensional compressible Navier-Stokes equations. Q is the array of conservative variables. E of G are the inviscid fluxes. These are the viscous fluxes. The shear stresses were modeled through Newton's law of viscosity. The temperature dependent viscosity is computed using Sutherland's law. Heat diffusion is modeled through Fourier's law of heat diffusion, heat convection. So when it comes to the inviscid and viscous flux discretization, Sana has just explained the numerical methods. I'm using the explicit version of his schemes, which are both of them are 4th order accurate in space. And for temporal discretization, I'm using PVD RK3 method. The flow solver, it's a completely in-house developed flow solver. It's a code written in Photon 90. To deal with complex geometries, I'm using curvilinear coordinate transformation and multi-block approach. It also has important conservation properties such as free stream and vortex preservation, geometric conservation law, obeying properties. It depends upon the way you compute the metrics. The code also has, the flow solver also has the capability to run through dynamic mesh domains. As you can see in this animation, there is a vortex convecting downstream in a dynamically deforming mesh environment. So the solver has been ported to run on single and multi-GPU platforms. We use OpenSCC plus MPI to do that. This is a code, small code snippet extracted from the solver. So there are 4 for loops here, 2 loops in Photon. So I've just added a directive on top of this. I'm just telling the compiler to run these 4 loops in a concurrent fashion by collapsing all of them and making that as a single loop, essentially. So this is as simple as that. OpenSCC is pretty simple, and we have achieved about 200 times speed up in comparison to a single core CPU. All the simulations that are being presented in this study are run on the NVIDIA DGX cluster at Technion. It has 8 A100 GPUs in it. So each simulation is around 100 million grid points, and it took around 7 days to complete. So let's start with the results. This is the computation setup. I have 3 cases, a convex wall, flat wall, and concave wall case. And to get these particular geometries, I've used a modified Gaussian distribution function. So it has a parameter sigma. By varying this parameter sigma, I get different geometries. For example, with sigma minus 0.8, I get this kind of convex geometry. The jet is coming from top. The dent height was maintained constant in both the convex wall and the concave wall case, which is around 0.498 D. The mesh resolution in all the three cases, like I said before, is 100 million cells. So to gain confidence on the CFD data that I'm simulating, I'm comparing my data with the experiments performed at NASA by Henderson and colleagues. So this is how their experimental setup looks like. There is a nozzle here and there is an impinging wall. So the jet comes out of the nozzle through a converging duct. So since there is no diverging portion, the nozzle exit Mach number is Mach 1, which is it's a choked under expanded jet. For the nozzle pressure ratio that was maintained inside the chamber, the ideally expanded jet Mach number is 1.56. The diameter of the nozzle exit is 25.4 millimeters, and for this configuration, the Reynolds number is around 5 into 10 power 5. But since it's very difficult to resolve all the scales in such a high Reynolds number, I'm reducing the Reynolds number by almost an order. The Reynolds number I've simulated is for 60,000. In the experiments, they have used particle image velocimetry and acoustic measurements as the diagnostics. And I'll be comparing my data with this. So one of the important things in supersonic jet simulations is to get the inflow right. So I'm using a duct here at the inflow. So I'm giving a laminar inflow here. It's basically I'm using Blasch's velocity profile, and for density and temperature, I'm using Kroger-Buseman profiles. So after a certain distance, I'm adding some annular fluctuations using this method called noise stripping, which was developed by Bogie and his colleagues in 2011. So essentially, I'm just adding some correlated random fluctuations along the annular region, which will trip the boundary layer to turbulence. And these are the mean and RMS velocity profiles at the nozzle exit, and I'll be feeding that to the inflow of the jet. So let's now look into the results. This is how this is for the flat wall case. These are the density contours at the center, and the surrounding that we have pressure fluctuations. We can see all kind of high-speed flow features such as expansion fans, shear layer, Markstrom oblique shocks, and internal jets. I've made a schematic diagram of this by taking an average of this whole flow field. This is how it looks like. So there is these are some important features, fine features. We have annular shocks as well and small expansion fans. There is a recirculating mode at the center. Now let's compare the data with the experiments first of all. What you are seeing on the screen are the velocity magnitude contours average, and the white box corresponds to the particle image velocimetry data from the experiments. We can already see a very good qualitative match between both experiments and the simulations. To get a more quantitative sense, I've compared data along different axes. This is along the jet axis, and these three are along the different along the radial directions at different X stations. We can see a good correlation between both experiment and CFD in all the plots. So now let's have a look into this density contours. We can see clearly it's not steady, but for me the most interesting case was this one, because the oscillations, there are new flow structures that are evolving in time, and some flow features are decaying. So now let's have a split screen view and compare each simulation. If we compare the concave case and the flat wall case, on the concave case, the Mach time is like exhibiting a high amplitude oscillation. But in the case of flat wall, the Mach time is still moving, but it's just like in a pulsation mode. It's just the amplitude is quite small. But here it's quite interesting. If you compare the concave case with the convex case, the Mach time is almost stationary here, but the oblique shock is slightly moving here. I think that corresponds to the flapping mode. Now let's only look into the concave case first of all. There are like new oblique shocks that are coming from the bottom, and there is some cavity flow happening in the bottom. There is some unsteady loading that's happening on the surface. So these are the different stages in the concave wall case. I made some schematic diagrams here. So this is the mean position of the Mach time. So as you can see, if we focus on this region, the Mach stem is moving up and down as we go from one stage to one stage, other stage. This is all for one complete cycle. But I want all of you to focus in this region. This is very interesting, I think. These red lines correspond to compression waves. Initially, they are pointing downwards, and in stage 2, they are pointing upwards. And they combine together to form a set of secondary oblique and oblique shocks and secondary Mach stem. There are two Mach stems now. And then these two Mach stems meet together to form a single Mach stem, and then these two oblique shocks meet together to form a single oblique shock. So in the meantime, there is a new compression that's creating at the bottom, and this happens in a cycle. So in conclusion, the Mach stem is studied in the convex case, it's pulsating in the flat wall case, and it's exhibiting high amplitude oscillations in the concave case. This is all qualitative results. Now let's have some quantitative results as well.
Go back and.
Okay. So these are what I have done is I've extracted density fluctuation contours at the nozzle exit plane for all the three cases. These are the density fluctuation contours at the nozzle exit plane. We can clearly see the amplitude. It's looking more red and more blue, which means it's more noisy here. But at an initial glance, it's very difficult to comprehend what's happening here. So what I've done is done proper orthogonal decomposition to make a more quantitative sense of this data. Through proper orthogonal decomposition, what we are essentially doing is we are decomposing the flow field in such a way that we are only looking at the most energetic modes first in the initial modes, and in the later modes corresponds to the least energetic modes. So in all the three cases, I have observed that only the first two modes are dominant, and following the second mode, there is a sudden collapse in energy, which means there are only two energetically significant events that are happening inside the flow field. So these are the two modes, and on top of that, if you observe the mode shapes, they are looking very similar to each other in each case, which means they are like orthogonal versions of each other. So let's ignore the mode 2 and just only look into the mode 1. So clearly the patterns are different. The first pattern, the first mode shape is like not axisymmetric. The mode number for the flat wall and concave case, the patterns are quite axisymmetric, which means it tells about the oscillation mode of the jet. In this case, the density fluctuations are oriented along a particular direction, which means the jet is flapping along a preferential plane, and that must be flapping B mode. And in these two cases, the density fluctuations are evenly distributed along the axis. So that corresponds with the toroidal A mode. I have also extracted the power spectral density of the time coefficients corresponding to each mode, and plotted these power spectral density plots. So as we can see, there is only single peak that is present in each case. The frequency is getting reduced as we increase the concavity. It starts from 0.8 and goes to 0.25. But whereas even though the frequency is decreasing, actually the amplitude is increasing slightly. In conclusion, there are only two dominant modes in all the three cases. There is a mode transformation that's happening as we increase the concavity. There is a high frequency speech waves in convex case compared to the other two cases, and the amplitude of the speech waves is highest in the concave case. So to conclude the presentation, larger simulations were performed to understand the effect of impinging wall curvature on supersonic jet noise. There is a good agreement between the experiments and CFD data in terms of mean velocity magnitude data. The near field acoustic footprint suggests that the concave case is the most noisy case. A proper orthogonal decomposition suggests that there are only two significant events happening at least near the near field acoustics. And there is a mode transformation that's happening as we move from concave case to convex case to concave. And as one of the future directions, I'll be running more cases with more geometrical parameters to try and scale this time delay parameter in the feedback notification. Thank you.
That was some beautiful CFD. I really, really like that. Question from the audience, please. Yes, Neil.
Could you think of it as the concave surface is focusing the acoustic waves back into the right places?
I think Stephen has pointed that out. I think, yeah, it's quite complicated. I'm not sure completely what's happening.
Okay. Yes.
For the convex case, so you saw that acoustic waves have sort of like a preferred plane which they oscillate around, right? So do you know why that is? Like in compared to the concave case or the flat.
You need to ask why that plane
Why is the referential plane?
along that angle.
Yeah, not like the same case for the other flat and concave.
It's quite random. The differential plane can occur at any angle. Even in experiments, if we do like one experiment from the other, the angle of the flapping plane can change, but it will only choose one plane. But the angle of the plane can be different. Even if you change the grid, the plane angle might change, but there will be only one grid.
Is it affected by like properties like the Mach number or something like that?
Initial conditions, numerical.
Are there any practical takeaways from this study so far? Like, do we want the surface of aircraft carriers to have bumps on them? Like, what's anything that you could take away in terms of noise reduction of these jets for practical purposes?
I think with this curved impinging walls can act as a control mechanism also maybe.
So maybe like where, like the landing site of where the aircraft like land, or if there's like a vertical, like you'd want to tailor the surface to
there is an optimized surface, it can actually give better substance.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, Hemanth, thank you very much.